Hey, I hope you're doing well today. Welcome back to Life with Al. I'm Susan, and I'll tell you, it's been a different type of week here. I had posted the first two videos in this series, the first one on the 3 myths of hospice. So if you're curious and you haven't seen that and you just want to know more about hospice and what the true focus is, which is not on death and dying, you can push that little subscribe button and you can find that video, the 3 myths of hospice, there. And then I did the second one, which was how we get our person with dementia admitted to hospice, because sometimes that can be a struggle and oftentimes they're discharged once they're on service. So that's really some good information of what we need to present to hospice in order to be admitted and then stay on. And then today I'm going to talk about just the core services of hospice, and finally, probably one of the most important things, how you choose a good hospice. So that's what I'm going to do today. But when I said it was kind of a different week, I had planned on doing this video actually 4 days ago, and I've learned I can't be on a schedule because my mom had a episode. We're not really sure what it was, if it was a seizure or a stroke, but she gave us quite a scare, and I thought we might be losing her for a day, and then the next morning, and in fact later that night, she kind of perked up a little and was making eye contact and seemed to come back to us, and then she was kind of almost back to her baseline, of how she was before the episode. And now today, I don't know, it's just I'm realizing how fragile this journey is, but I'm just really reminded we have to focus on living in the present and just doing the best we can in the moment, because none of us know what tomorrow's going to bring. We unfortunately don't have do-overs, or we can't redo the day, and so I'm just really reminded again how fragile this journey is. It truly is. Well, all of life, quite honestly, not just if you have a loved one with dementia, but all of life, it can be very fragile. So we've got to hug our loved ones tight. We've got to milk the joy out of every day, just knowing none of us, know the future. So live in the present fully, be there, love your inner circle, those people around you, and just make the most of every day. So let me talk to you about what all hospice provides, because I tell you, they were my lifeline, during those scary hours when I wasn't really sure what was going on with my mom. And so the nurse is the person I called. They have a nurse on call 24/7, and so that's the case manager. She kind of oversees the rest of the team players, team members. I guess, well, no, they're not players, they're team members, but she is obviously a nurse, so she's there for the physical care, pain management, making sure all the symptoms are managed, ordering pain or any type of medication, and she's the liaison with the physician. So on call 24/7. So she is an integral part of the team. But let me just say, to me, the heart of hospice, the most important person, bar none, is the certified nursing assistant. And we have one who is a godsend. Oh my goodness, she is precious. She comes in and lights up the room. I'm a little more emotional today after this week, but she actually texted me a few times when she wasn't scheduled to come out, when she saw on the on-call log that Mom had an episode, telling me that she was thinking of my mom, how she really hoped she was going to see her again, and how my mom was the highlight of her day, and just sweet. I know how busy she is. She didn't have to do that. But that CNA is someone who obviously comes in and does the direct care. They do the bathing, they change the linens, they make sure the skin is in good tact. They always do a good head to toe, because nurses, don't always do that with hospice. But boy, that CNA, she's got keen eyes, and she can find things that, sometimes that I've missed. So integral part of the team, and sadly, the least paid, sometimes the most under-recognized. But I have always said, hospice could not exist without the CNAs. Sometimes patients share more with the CNAs than they do the social worker or chaplain, because when you're bathing someone and you're giving them that intimate care, all walls are down. And so anyway, I can't praise them enough, but I need to move on. So there's also the chaplain, obviously there for spiritual support, and just know they are not denominational. As I mentioned on one of my videos, they're not there to proselytize or get you to come over to their way of faith. they're really there to support you. And when I say you know, on that first video, I talked about hospice isn't just there for the patient, it's for the whole family, for that whole inner circle, even if they're not relatives. And so that chaplain is there to provide support. Sometimes they can be the liaison, calling your pastor or your priest or whomever. They can give last rites, they can give communion, whatever you need as far as what your religious rituals may be or traditions. They are there to help you. And if they can't do that personally, they will figure out how they can contact someone who can. So very, very important people. And then finally, the social worker, which is what I was if you've watched any of my videos. And the social worker is there really for emotional support, to guide those families through the grief process, and also just focusing on life, which all of hospice does, you know, trying to figure out, are there things left that that person would want to do? And I know that looks a little different with dementia, but just affirming that person's life, guiding life reviews, reminiscent therapy, and not just there for the emotional support, but also just to decrease whatever stress we can. So that may be finding community resources to pay for a utility bill, or trying to find different resources to cover different things. And so really educating about what's available to decrease your stress. Sometimes it's helping with applications for FMLA if the person needs to take family leave, or with placement. Sometimes caregivers start the journey thinking they're going to be able to provide care 24/7, and then things change and they can't for valid reasons. And so that social worker can help with the paperwork needed to get into a facility, and help get applied for Medicaid, all those different things. So just know that each of those team members, the nurse, the CNA, the social worker, the chaplain, and volunteers are available. They do a variety of things as far as coming in and providing companionship. And keep in mind, all of this looks a little different now during COVID. You know, it's like our volunteer isn't coming for obvious reasons, and our nurse is doing virtual visit. The CNA, she's still in the trenches coming in. But anyway, it looks a little different right now, but typically a volunteer could also come in just to be here. You know, if a family member or the caregiver needs to get out, do errands, or just needs a breather, volunteers can provide companionship. They're often in the hospice office doing clerical, answering phone, those type things. So that's the hospice team. I didn't mention the medical director. I guess the physician would like to be recognized, but all hospices have a separate medical director. And so when you come on hospice, you can either keep your primary physician as to oversee the hospice care as well. I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, that physician would even encourage you to defer to the hospice medical director, since they're an expert in end-of-life care. So typically he takes over all of the care, and that just makes it simple for the hospice team to be able to get prescriptions filled and to brainstorm on the spot. Whereas your primary physician, even if it's been a lifelong relationship and you hate to say goodbye to that physician, sometimes it can be hard for them to manage and just be Johnny on the spot with hospice patients. So just keep that in mind. So that's basically the hospice team. I wanted to talk real quickly about all the things that hospice provides. First of all, Medicare, like I said before, 85% of patients are on with Medicare. With insurance, typically they're the same benefits. It might vary a little bit. But so all of those team members can visit, and they have to have doctor's orders and a care plan, all of that. I'm not going to get into the details of all of that, but so it pays for all of those visits, but it also pays for medical supplies. So if you need incontinence supplies, gloves, can't get gloves right now, unfortunately, but typically it would include gloves, diapers, not the pull-ups, unfortunately, but just the true adult diapers, and barrier cream. Like right now, well, I'm not even going to get into it, but there's several things medically that my mom needed as far as supplies, and they provide that, which is a great benefit, because let me tell you, those things are expensive. Most hospices will provide Insure if that's your loved one's only source of nutrition. You know, there's Medicare, if they're eating a lot of other things, Medicare's not going to cover it. But if your person's having difficulty swallowing and just doesn't have an appetite, and that's all they're taking in, ask your hospice about getting Insure or whatever brand they might carry, but a nutritional supplement. And so they cover all of that. They also cover durable medical equipment. which would be things like a wheelchair, a bedside commode, a shower bench or stool, and really anything in the home to help you manage that care that you would have in a nursing home or hospital. Typically, hospice is going to be able to provide that in the home. Again, great benefit. And so they also cover medications related to the terminal disease. And some people think they're going to come in and cover all medications. But for example, if a person has diabetes and they're on for cancer, they'll cover anything related to the cancer, but they're not going to cover insulin. So it has to be their terminal diagnosis. Now, with something like dementia, sometimes it's you can look and see, and the physician and nurse go down the list and see what's really related. If it was a medication they'd been, like if they were on an antidepressant for years and years before, that hospice may or may not choose to cover that because, like with my mom, they're covering hers because that came on board much later to help stabilize her mood. And so they are covering that. They typically, or I think always, would cover anything to help them sleep at night, anything to decrease anxiety. So just know they'll cover any of those medications, and if it's a symptom that comes up that's secondary to the diagnosis. Like with my mom, you wouldn't think, okay, they're going to cover compazine, which is for nausea and vomiting, because that's not related to dementia, but that's symptom control management, and she probably wouldn't be having issues like that if she didn't have dementia. And so they are covering that right now. So anyway, the nurse will go through a list, get all the medications your person is on when they admit, and they'll tell you what they will and will not cover. And if you're confused about something, not in a challenging way, but certainly it's your right to say, well, I'm really confused because this does seem like it's related, because there's some gray area and some hospices cover things that other ones don't. So it's always good to ask. Okay, finally, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about how you choose a really good hospice, because I can tell you, when I've looked online and I see these little check sheets of, how you determine who's a good hospice, hospices can skew data. And so I just want to give you some insider information here so that okay, they're just not painting, a rosy picture here. This truly is who they are. First of all, you want to find a hospice who's been around for a while, because depending on if you're in a CON state, meaning certificate of need, like for example, North Carolina is a certificate of need state. So there's a handful of hospices that serve Mecklenburg County that I'm in, which is, a huge county, but it's limited because they have to go to the state and show that there's a need. South Carolina, where I worked most of my hospice career, was not a CON state. There was literally 78, it's probably higher now, hospices that came into Richland County. And this is the thing, when you're not a CON state, basically anybody can hang a shingle. Now they do have to get certified, so I don't want to minimize it. That's a process. But often they are in business a year, 2 years, and they're closing down because they're just not able, to get their census up to where they can be profitable. So make sure you get a hospice that's been around for, a long time, and they have a good reputation in the community. Secondly, I've seen on some of the little check sheets, ask what the patient-nurse ratio is. You don't want to ask that. And I know it seems common sense. Like if you have a child who, is going to school, you want to know, okay, what's that teacher-student ratio? So I get it. You want to make sure that ratio is low, so they're getting the most attentive care, and that nurse is not stretched too thin. Here's the thing. A lot of hospices skew that data. They count every nurse that is on their payroll. So that would include LPNs, that there's limited things that an LPN could do. They will count if the director is a nurse, if the intake person's a nurse, all of those people that might be administrative nurses, they count as nurses. So you can imagine that's really going to skew that ratio. So don't ask what the nurse patient ratio is. You ask, what is the average caseload for the case managers? And not the nurse, because the case manager is the nurse who's in the field doing visits. And sometimes they count the admissions nurse. Well, the admissions nurse, that's all she does is admissions. So you want to ask, what is the average number of patients that a case manager has on her caseload? Because that's going to tell you how many patients that nurse is responsible for. And if that number is above 12, you better run the other direction, because I have had hospices, well, one in particular, they expected their nurses to carry between 17 and 20 patients. And I can tell you, those nurses were frazzled. There was high turnover. It's impossible to do a good job when you feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to get 6 or 7 visits in today. Nurses should be doing 3 to 4 visits. That's best practice. Even if they're in facility. Some people will tell you they're in a facility, there's not drive time, they can boom, 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 knock those patients out. That's kind of language sometimes people use behind closed doors. You don't want to use boom, 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 knock those patients out, because facility patients sometimes need more care, because they should be going around spending time talking to staff, coordinating with the team there in the nursing home. And so those should be just as time consuming, time spent with those patients as patients in the home. Okay, I need to move on, but just make sure those caseloads are low, because I can tell you, understaffed hospices, they load their nurses up, and I know, boy, I worked at one. It's a vicious cycle, because then it's hard to get quality nurses, and I get it, but you don't want that for your loved one, believe me. The other thing that's really important is to make sure they're accredited. Now, they're going to have to be Medicare accredited, because they have to have that to have a license. And so that goes over COPS, or conditions of participation. So I'm not going to get into the details of that. So that they've got to have adequate staffing. They've got to have vendors as far as pharmacy and medical director, blah, blah, blah. They have to have contracts with different things as far as respite. In fact, I need to talk about that real fast. I almost forgot. But anyway, so Medicare accreditation, that's a given. But you want to make sure they have something above that, because I worked at a hospice one time who I came in and said, we need to get CHAP accredited, which is the Community Health Accreditation Partner. That's a private organization. They come in with a more stringent inspection, and they do surprise visits, and let me tell you, there are little bees buzzing all around when they see an auditor's coming in. But this hospice said, no, that's too much work. We don't want to jump through the hoops, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is they were lazy and didn't want to have that higher level of expertise. So just know, CHAP accreditation, that's impressive if they have that. Secondly, if they're related to a hospital or a medical facility, they might not have CHAP, because that would be community hospices. They might have JCO, which would be Joint Commission accreditation. So any one of those, and in your state they may have something different, but it's always better to have another accreditation on top of Medicare. Okay, that shows they're dedicated. One final thing, and then I want to talk about the levels of care if you want to hang around and hear that. But is making sure that they have nurses that are CHIPN nurses. And CHIPN stands for they are a certified hospice and palliative care nurse. And this is a licensure, or not licensure, it's an exam to have that certification. And I can tell you, I knew nurses that had been in hospice a long time who I knew were stellar nurses, and they failed, and they had to take up multiple times. It is very stringent, very specific on end-of-life issues, obviously pain control issues, just different symptom management. Nurses who are CHIPN, they are cream of the crop. And so while it would be shocking for a hospice to have all their nurses CHIPN, they should at least have a couple, or you should actually ask, are nurses working towards getting their certification? Because if they're working towards it, at least that hospice is trying to make sure they are experts in their field, and they're not just hanging out, a shingle, I hate to say trying to make money, but hospice, if run right, can be a profitable business. So make sure that they're focused on the right thing, and their nurses are CHIPN certified. Oh, I thought of one other thing. I'm sorry, which is geographical area. So Medicare says that a hospice has to be able to respond in a reasonable amount of time to any patient on their caseload. And most hospices, that standard is they have to be within an hour response time of their office. Okay, I can tell you, some hospices push that, and they accept patients that are not in their what I would consider a reasonable response time. Because you imagine, okay, if their office is here in the center, they can go an hour around, Okay, so if your on-call nurse is over here in the corner on the side, I guess the circle doesn't have corners. Your on-call nurse is over here. You're over here. Guess what? It's going to be a 2-hour response time. That's not good. Seriously, that is not good. If your loved one is in a crisis or has just passed, you don't want to hear, I'm going to be there in a couple of hours. So if there is a large geographical area, ask if there are on-call backup people or if they have individual teams. Like if the area is huge, like if your hospice says, oh, we cover 10 counties. Might blow your mind, but they do. You make sure then, do you have multiple teams? Do you have a team A, B, C, and each of these quadrants of a circle? Is that a thing? Anyway, they have to have adequate coverage. So don't just, assume that they are admitting patients that are a good, a reasonable distance from their office. So you might want to ask, do you have other patients in this area? Because when hospices are trying to grow, they'll really push that and go kind of outside the bounds, knowing, okay, well, we want to get another office in this area, so we're going to try to get a cluster of patients. But you can tell, I have dealt with this personally, and I left a hospice because of this. They wanted us to take a patient 2 hours from our office because they wanted to open a branch there. But then what about the people before the branch is open? It infuriates me. So just ask, do you have other patients in this area? I don't know how else to get to the nitty gritty of if they have nurses living in that area, because maybe the hospice office is an hour away from you, but they could have nurses who live in that area and kind of have either a satellite office or a team, that's in place. So sometimes that is hard to distinguish, but you can also ask physicians, your physician there in your hometown, okay, what hospice do you know of that is here local and can respond quickly? Because I know I'm beating the dead horse, y'all, but it is important. There are hospices who will admit those patients knowing they're their only patient 2 hours out. And if you've got a nurse who's seeing 3 or 4 patients and then they've got to drive that far to see one patient, somebody's going to be suffering. And that is not an office that's running like a well-oiled machine, believe me. So ask those questions. Real quickly, I just want to touch on the 4 levels of hospice care. There's routine home care, which that's when hospice comes into wherever your person's residence is, assisted living, skilled facility, but they're coming in just to provide routine hospice. Now, there is also respite care, and unfortunately during COVID-19, there is no respite care, because with respite, your loved one can go to a facility for 5 days. Medicare covers it for caregivers just to kind of catch their breath and take care of themselves, and that most hospices offer that quarterly. So that's respite care. There's also inpatient hospice care, which is general inpatient. I talked about this a little bit on one of my other videos, but that's if they have uncontrolled symptoms that, like pain or nausea, vomiting, that can't be managed at home, so they can go to a hospice house, or sometimes hospices have contracts and they can go there to get those symptoms managed with the goal of coming back home. Now, I'll tell you, during COVID-19, that would not be a good idea, obviously. I think probably what most hospices are doing, instead of GIP, which is general inpatient, if they do need to go out, maybe they need IV, just infusion pain medications that they don't feel comfortable doing at home, they can also get continuous care at home. Now, that's not continuous care 24/7, but the nurse is in there much more often. In fact, she's in there the majority of the day. CNAs can come in for hours at a time. And so that's short term to make sure that that patient can get to a more comfortable place. So GIP and continuous care are both kind of crisis oriented, making sure that that person, can get to a more peaceful, pain-free place to pass. But anyway, I think that's really it in a nutshell. I hope that was helpful. If you didn't watch my other 2, please press the little subscribe, or I guess it's over here now, press the little subscribe button so you can get caught up on the details of what I reviewed in those. But anyway, I hope everyone has a great day. Until next time, take care.